That's not.
Good morning. I declare this meeting of Kempsey Shire Council open. It's the 17th of May 2022. Welcome everyone. All members of the Kempsey Shire community are entitled to attend council meetings to observe. Please refrain from interjecting or undertaking any behaviour that will stop councillors from undertaking the important task of decision making. I remind all people attending this meeting that it is being webcast on YouTube with audio and vision. A recording of the meeting is available on the internet and is required to be available for 12 months. Private recordings of the meeting should not occur. Only members of the media are allowed to make a recording. Please ensure all devices like mobile phones are on silent mode. On behalf of Council, I welcome all people in the public gallery and observing live on the internet to our meeting today. Councillors in attendance, so Councillor Arthur Bain, Councillor Simon Ferguson, Councillor Anthony Patterson, Councillor Josh Freeman and Councillor Alexandra Wyatt. Council staff in attendance, we've got Director Robert Fish, Director of Operations and Planning, and Director Stephen Mitchell, Director of Corporate and Commercial. The General Manager, Mr. Craig Milburn, on my right, and Manager of Governments, Daniel Thorogood. And we have other staff up the back too, but they don't appear to be wanting to be on camera. Thank you. We shall now begin the meeting. Item 1, the prayer. Someone like to say the prayer, please? Councillor Patterson, thank you.
Thank you. Dear Lord, help us in our deliberations today so that our decisions will be for the greater good for the whole of the Kempsey Shire. Amen.
Amen. Acknowledgement of country. Councillor Bain.
Barang marang, tangati guten titten bari, nyana bubita, nyana buwaro bokul, pandunga kai malamangu, tangati guten titten bari, tanang maranga, titinja baria. So I said, good morning, everyone. This is Dunghutti country, from the mountains to the ocean. This is Dunghutti country. May you all be well in this place. Maringbu, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bain. We have apologies and applications for leave of absence by councillors. We have 3 councillors who have offered apologies. Councillor Campbell, Councillor Riddington and Councillor Craigie. I would like to move acceptance. Councillor Patterson. A seconder, please. Councillor Ferguson. Any dissent? We accept those. Carried. We now move on to item 4, which is the confirmation of the minutes. They are attached to the agenda. I presume everyone's read them. Would someone like to move those minutes being accurate? Councillor Bain.
I move that we accept the minutes.
Seconder. Councillor Wyatt. Okay. Is there any dissent from accepting the minutes? Being no dissent, I declare it carried. We now move on to number 5, disclosures of interest. Disclosure of interest, Councillor Bain.
Yes, I would like to disclose a significant non-pecuniary interest in the matter of the Oven Mountain pumped hydro.
Item 9.6.
9.6, as I'm in the CEO of Dunghutti Land Council and I'm in commercial negotiation with the proponents.
Thank you, Councillor Bain, and you'll manage that.
I'll manage that by leaving the room when item 9.6 is up for discussion.
Thank you, Councillor Bain. Any other disclosures of interest? We now move to item 6 on the agenda, items passed by exception. And councillors may remove any item from that list if they intend to vote against it or they wish to speak on the item. Item 9.7 is withdrawn already because we've had a speaker on it. So we now have items 9.5, 9.6, 9.8, 11.1, 11.2 in the items that passed by exception. Any councillors wish to remove any of those items? Councillor Patterson.
I'd just like to ask a question through to the General Manager.
Okay, we'll have questions after it.
I can ask a question on the item rather than withdrawing it, if it can be answered right now.
Yes, but first of all, let's find out any item being withdrawn and then I'll ask the questions.
Okay.
It's always a procedure. We make sure people can have their questions answered. So no other items being withdrawn. I'll withdraw 11.2, rehabilitation of apron and taxiways at Kempsey Airport. And Councillor Wyatt?
I think I'm in the same position as Councillor Patterson. If my question can't be answered, then I will withdraw, and I don't know the procedure correctly.
Well, Councillor Wyatt, thank you for that. We'll withdraw first, ask questions, and then if there's further withdrawals, that's possible, okay? Okay, so we'll go on to questions on the items that haven't been withdrawn.
Oh, can I withdraw an item?
Sorry.
Did I miss that?
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Councillor Freeman, do you have an item you wish to withdraw?
Yes, 9.5. Thank you.
9.5, procedure, rental assessment and rebate. Thank you. We'll now move on to questions. And as I said, if there are questions that you have answers that you have issues with, you can withdraw an item further. So, Councillor Patterson, you have some questions. Thank you.
My question was on item 9.5, so as it's been withdrawn, I will wait to ask the question then. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Councillor Wyatt?
I have a question on 9.6 and 11.1. My question on 9.6 is I just wanted to make a comment on it rather than withdraw. Can I make the comment now or should I just withdraw 9.6?
If you wish to debate it or speak on it.
No, 9.6.
No, 9.7, no. The 9.7 has been withdrawn. Order, Council.
Oh, sorry.
If you want to make a comment on 9.6, that means you wish to speak on it, so it has to be withdrawn. We can't make a comment now. It's only questions at this time. So if you wish to withdraw 9.6, Councillor Wyatt.
Sorry, the numbering is wrong. So on my paper in front of me, it has 9.6 as a voluntary planning agreement.
Yes.
But down on the bottom left, it says I am withdrawing the voluntary planning agreement, whatever number that is. This screen? 9.7. Okay. And my question on the 11.1 is just in regards to one of the legal matters. I don't want to withdraw it or discuss it, but I'm requesting that councils have a briefing on the RISE issue because there's been a lot of emails coming forward. So I was wondering whether there is an opportunity for us to have a briefing at some point in the immediate future rather than today.
Yeah, through we can
Mr. Manager, thank you.
Organise that for the team's briefing at the first Wednesday in June.
Okay, so we've left in the items passed by exception are 9.8 and 11.1, and I'm a bit confused on the numbering, so something's happened in my printout. So sorry, I apologise if I seem to be lost because I am. We have two items in the items by exception, passed by exception. Who would like to move that they be passed? Councillor Bain. A seconder, please. Councillor Freeman. Well, I'll put that. Anyone? Well, none withdraw, so I declare it carried. We now move on to item 7, Merrill minutes, and there have been 2 late Merrill minutes put up by myself to put up for this council deliberation. First one is 7.1, recognition of Dave Sands, and the recommendation is, I'll read it to you, that council, 1, establish a working party and liaise with the Ritchie family on an appropriate plan for due and deserving recognition in Kempsey of the Sands Brothers boxers for their sporting feats. 2, seek support from the Honourable Belinda Pavey MP, Member for Oxley, the Honourable Stuart Ayres MP, Minister for Tourism and Sport, and any other relevant bodies in gaining financial support to implement the plans for recognition. And 3, receives an update to the September 2022 Ordinary Council meeting on progress of planning and costings of this recognition project. So I formally move that, and I will speak to it, and then I'll ask for other councillors to speak to it if they wish. I had the honour on Thursday of attending the Jubilee Room in Parliament House in Sydney for the presentation of the 1949 championship belt by the Boxing Federation to the family of Dave Sands. Dave Sands and his 5 brothers were renowned boxers, and their descendants live here and in other parts of Australia, but they were really pleased that after this long battle, they have achieved that recognition of receiving that championship belt. The thing that surprises me is that it's taken so long. It's taken 73 years for that to happen. In Kempsey, we have Dave Sands Street at Greenhill, and we have a plaque in honouring Dave Sands and his brothers outside the cottage at the Macleay Historical Society Kempsey Museum at South Kempsey. They are the only 2 items of recognition in the Kempsey Shire, and yet these gentlemen, Dungutty men, all were outstanding athletes in the boxing field. Sadly, Dave Sands died in a car accident at Dungog in 1952, 2 years before I was born. He left a family, a wife, and 4 children, and his descendants are here in Australia today, some of them living here in Kempsey. And yet, despite all those feats and the championships boxing that Dave Sands and his brothers achieved with no due recognition, I think it's timely and it's urgent, in fact, that Kempsey Council takes the lead in making sure there's recognition in Kempsey of Dave Sands and his brothers in their feats. So I recommend that we adopt this motion, and our working party will then be able to work through locations, and I'm sure there are many people here today and listening on the internet who would have ideas on how we could go about this recognition. The working party will work through all suggestions, and we will work with the family to make sure that an appropriate and due recognition of Dave Sands and his brothers is erected at some place in Kempsey. I welcome any support from my fellow councillors. Who else would like to speak? Councillor Patterson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I definitely support the Mayoral Minute 7.1 in the recognition of Dave Sands. I just have a question on number 3 in receives an update of September Ordinary Council meeting on the progress and planning of costings and the recognition of this project. It doesn't seem to have anything there that it will go ahead or it won't go ahead, or we have any say or decision in that, or any restriction on costings or any budgetary. I just put this through to the General Manager. Is that wording fine enough to come back to Council? And if the budget is outside Council's available funds, is there any restriction in that would halt that, or is that wording mean it's going ahead no matter how much it costs?
Mr. General Manager.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. The way I see that, part of the recommendation is that's just simply an update. This doesn't give us any permission to actually start the actual project. What it does is bring back, and council will have to look at adopting a budget at some point. This is to give an update. We may or may not have firm figures, we may not have firm locations or exactly what's happening by that time, but it'll give you an update. I suspect it may take a little bit longer to get all those things firmed up, and then we'll be able to actually look at how do we actually put that into a council budget and try and fund it. And that's where the items before that, where we're actually trying to get that funding from other sources.
And thank you. And just one more comment is that it would be fantastic to see the lookout at Greenhill on River Street to be the location of this recognition, whether it be a statue or a plaque or a dedicated area. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Councillor Bain and then Councillor Wyatt, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to speak in support of this mayoral minute. Dave Sands was an incredible athlete, and particularly during a time when Indigenous First Nations people didn't have the right to vote, weren't considered citizens. There were many, many obstacles to functioning within society, and that family just really laid a trail. So I'd very much like to support it, and I think it's very relevant in terms of that we're also looking at our reconciliation, the beginning of the journey of our reconciliation action plan at this meeting. So thank you, Mr. Mayor, for bringing this to council.
Thank you, Councillor Bain. Councillor Wyatt, please.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Councillor Bain. 100% agree with you. I think I read about this the other day on a Facebook post, and I was just a bit saddened and surprised. And I think this is a bit of truth-telling of Australia's history and the racism that prejudice existed in him preventing from being given his belt 70-odd years ago. I 100% support it. And I would just like to add in your working group is whether you can add a terms of reference plus a timeline so that we have an end date where this family can, well, hopefully will get their recognition. So it's not, so in other words, it's not a group that continues, that there is a time frame established in that.
Mr. General Manager would like to answer that, and we could have. I would open to the idea of going into committee of the whole to have a discussion about that, Councillor White. But first of all, here, Mr. General Manager, thank you.
Yeah, in formulating the recommendation, we actually discussed this with the Mayor, and what we'd actually like to be able to do is go to the family and work with them on the terms of reference. And we had said that it certainly will need to have a sunset clause. It's not something that's going to be here forever. There's a very strong desire from the family, and I think judging from this from the council, to ensure this happens quickly. So I don't see this as something that's going to be dragging on. I'll be personally leading this from a council staff perspective, and I think we'll see some fairly quick progress on it.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, Councillor White, you happy with that? You don't need to amend this at all?
No, I'm happy with that, as long as with a time frame. So there's some expectations that are managed,
yes.
And again, fully support it. I was very surprised, especially given the fact of the awards and 6 brothers involved in boxing. That's incredible. And I know nothing about boxing, but amazing.
Thank you, Councillor White. Anyone else wish to speak? No further questions. I'll put the motion to council. Councillor Freeman, you wish to speak? No. So, as per usual, is there any dissent in the motion? I'm pleased to say that it has been carried unanimously. Congratulations to all of you for supporting this. We now move on to the next item, which is a mayoral minute 7.2. I'll read the recommendation as you now have in front of you, and then I'll quickly speak to it. The recommendation is that Council resolves, pursuant to sections 2962 and 4 of the Local Government Act 1993, that 1. An election arrangement is to be entered into for the New South Wales Electoral Commission to administer the election to fill all casual vacancies occurring by reason of an order made in the New South Wales Electoral Commission versus Kempsey Shire Council, number 3, 2022. New South Wales Supreme Court 409 in respect of any election held or purportedly held on 4th of December 2021, and 2, such electoral arrangement is to be entered into by contract between New South Wales Electoral Commissioner and the Council. That is the Merrill Minute recommendation, and I move that now formally. And speaking to it, this is an urgent Merrill Minute in that we have to make this decision now, or we would have to call an extraordinary council meeting and pass the same sort of thing, same sort of motion at that meeting. So we brought it forward as a Merrill Minute for it to be considered now. It's a legal requirement for us to enter in an agreement for an election before the 4th of August at the moment under that Supreme Court order. And there's a timeline of putting out, closing the electoral roll, having a nomination period, a close of nomination, and an actual election date. All those things have to be done in a time order, and that time order will be affected if we haven't entered into a decision on who will be running the election for us. It could be a private company, but for us to have a private company do this, we would require to put out tenders, which would be result in a longer delay that would put us past the 4th of August. So we are locked into having the Electoral Commission at the moment run the council election for us before the 4th of August. There are other matters ongoing elsewhere, but at the moment before us is this legal decision we have to make as council, and so I ask you to support it, and if things change on other matters, we will deal with that in the right time and right order. So I recommend you support this motion, and I now ask for anyone who wishes to speak for or against to nominate now. Councillor Wyatt, followed by Councillor Patterson, please.
Thank you, Mayor. I reluctantly support this recommendation. I'm not happy to, although in principle or ethically, I'm not happy to support New South Wales Election Commission to conduct a by-election given their failure in the December 2021 election and the financial impact that it has caused the people of New South Wales through litigation, plus the people of Kempsey. Supreme Court was careful not to use the word negligence. Perhaps a better term is a sloppy execution of a task of running an election in which Kempsey Council contracted them to perform. It's noted that Kempsey Council will have 3 local government elections in 30 months, lucky us, and that doesn't include the 2 state and federal elections. This does have an impact on the delivery of services that the community expects from its council. This does have a direct and indirect cost of that foregone in fixing roads and potholes and delivering services. And I note that there are contractual arrangements regarding the failed election, as well as a timing process in which this by-election needs to be held. So I reluctantly and feel coerced in supporting this recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Wyatt. Councillor Patterson, please.
Thank you. I do support the 7.2 Merrill Minute. My sentiments fairly well echo Councillor Wyatt's comments then, but I just want to put it on record that us councillors who ran for the previous election, where we stand as councillors at the moment, had absolutely no input into the fact that this was a election failure. And while we've borne the brunt of lots of comments and innuendos that our us as councillors has not liked the outcome of this election, that we had nothing to do with this election failure. And I would like to echo my sentiments again that the cost financially, emotionally and socially to the community and to us as councillors should go down on record that this has been a really big failure by the Electoral Commission. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Any other councillor wish to speak? If not, I will finish the debate by saying I too support what Councillor Patterson and Councillor Wyatt have said about the horrendous failure of iVote and the effect on councillors having to go through an election campaign and then be labelled as defendants. It's a horrendous situation, and Councillor Patterson's point on the social effect throughout our Kempsey Shire electorate and Councillor Wyatt pointing out that we have all these elections in 30 months. It's not good for democracy, but in one way the law has to be followed, and that's what the Supreme Court has ruled. So I close the debate, and I now ask for a vote on whether you support the motion as put forward in 7.2. Are there any dissent on supporting the motion that is before us? If not, I declare it carried unanimously. We now come to reports to Council, items 9 and 9.1 is the Delivery Program and Operational Plan 2021-2022, the third quarter progress report. And before we begin or even have the motion moved, I would ask Mr. Mitchell, Director, to give us an introduction. He has an unlimited time limit and he can speak for half an hour, but I don't think it will go that long.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillors, this is the third quarterly report for the 2021-22 financial year. There are several items within this report that are worth highlighting, and I'll just take a short amount of time to go through those. Firstly, in terms of our operating result, so at a consolidated level, our operating result has improved by $0.7 million to a full year surplus of $1.3 million. That improvement is mainly due to improved income forecasts across sort of various income lines and partly offset by around about $500,000 increase in some of our operating expenditures. Just to be clear, sorry, that operating result is excluding capital contributions and grants, which I'll explain a little bit more in a minute. For the general fund, that we had a previously adopted deficit of $1.7 million for the general fund. That result will improve by around about $600,000 to a revised operating deficit of $1.1 million as a result of the adjustments that are proposed within this report and within the quarterly budget review statements. The report, we've tried to go into quite some detail because there are a number of movements that to explain those ups and downs from an income and expenditure perspective, and they sort of are articulated in quite some detail within the report. The capital expenditure is probably the one area where we've seen the biggest change, and so what's proposed as part of this quarterly budget review is a $22.3 million reduction in our capital expenditure for the year. Again, we've included substantial detail in the report because there are a number of projects that have had proposed budget changes, and where we're actually proposing those projects to have reduced spend in this financial year. And the main driver of those reductions is largely the wet weather that's been experienced this financial year, not just the floods, but we've had ongoing wet weather preceding and post the flood event, which has really impacted on our ability to deliver our capital program. So as a result, that capital expenditure has been significantly reduced, as I said, by $22.3 million. And when we bring back the long-term financial plan and our budget for next year to the June council meeting, you'll see the re-profiling of a lot of those projects, including reductions in this report, will actually find their way into the 2022-23 financial year. There's another impact as well that's been impacting on our capital expenditure delivery, which is around supply chain issues. We've obviously, like a lot of businesses, have experienced difficulties in terms of obtaining contractors, and in some respects that has obviously resulted in some of our projects needing to be delayed or not progressing as quickly as we'd hope. And that's another factor in the pushing out, if you like, of some of the capital expenditure and the reduction that's been proposed in this quarterly budget review. The other impact around supply chain is that, along with inflationary cost pressures, which I'm sure everyone's aware with, given the upcoming election and the discussion around the high level of inflation. We're also seeing that that's actually having an upward increase in terms of the cost of delivering a number of our projects. We're seeing significant increase across construction projects in particular. And so you'll see for those projects where we've actually shown an increase in the capital expenditure for this year, the main factor that's driving that in a lot of respects is that inflationary cost pressure that's driving up those costs for our projects. What we have done is include a fairly significant amount of commentary in the report so that that's available for you as councillors and for the community to articulate the impact of those supply chain issues and those inflationary cost pressures, and have also included in our recommendation a point number 6 to actually call that out. I think it's important for that to be part of that resolution because it is the main driver of some of these impacts that we're seeing, and it also has an impact on our grant-funded projects. So we are seeing in a number of respects where we had grant funding to deliver a project. Once we're now getting our tender or request for quotes back in relation to those, that the cost of those projects is increasing more than what we originally thought they would be at the time of submitting the grant. And also it's having an impact in terms of the time frame delivery on some of those grant funded projects where we will need to speak to the funding bodies around increasing or extending the completion date for those projects. They're probably the main impacts. The rest of the attachments to the report are as we provide to you every quarter, and are fairly consistent in terms of what you would have seen in the first 2 quarters of this financial year. The last one probably point out is just in relation to our exception report in relation to the delivery program and OP, where we're still tracking well in terms of the delivery of that. So we've got less than 10% of those items have either been deferred or not started or are behind schedule. So despite everything else, is still good progress in relation to the delivery of our operating plan.
Just Mr. Mayor, if I just add.
Thank you, Director Mitchell, and supplementary comment, please.
Yeah, just to sort of, I guess, reinforce that to the councillors and to the public. Just received yesterday some cost increases from a well-established quantity surveyor, in the construction industry. They're doing major development, working on some of our projects, and that, just to give you a bit of an idea, these are cost increases since January this year, between January and April. 20% in concrete, 35% for reinforcement, so steel reinforcement, structural steel 40%, copper for cabling and submains 30%. Glazing 60%. So they're the sorts of prices, and that's simply in 4 months. Like it's something coming personally out of the construction industry many years ago, and having been in local government for as long as I have now, I've never seen prices going like that, and that doesn't account for the price increases from the pandemic prior to that. That is just simply in 4 months.
Thank you, Mr. General Manager. Again, thank you, Director Mitchell, with extensive reports on our situation. And we now have the recommendation before you. I'd like someone to move it and then seek a seconder. Councillor Wyatt.
I can move it. I'll move it.
Thank you. And a seconder, please. Councillor Patterson. Councillor Wyatt, would you like to speak to it, please?
I just actually want a clarification question. I just want our General Manager to read out those statistics a little slower, please?
Yes.
It's amazing that lot of numbers. Thank you.
Yeah. So concrete, 20%. Reinforcement, 35%. I don't think I mentioned metal roofing, 15%. Structural steel, 40%. Copper cabling and submains, 30%. What else did I use? Glazing, 60%. Yeah, so there's some of the things. Aluminium for windows was 16%. And I said it's just January to April this year.
Councillor White, do you want to speak in favour of this hard work by staff?
Thank you very much to the staff for their hard work in putting this together and providing the explanations for this. I'm very mathematically challenged, but I did go through all of the reports and figure it out for myself, which I'm glad that I read and understood exactly what you said, Director Mitchell, so thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Freeman, please.
Is there potentially an opportunity to learn a little bit about our capacity as a council with our workforce on delivering projects, so we don't, plan too much in a set amount of time and then end up having to delay projects? Because I'm guessing this delaying also has added costs on that. The longer we delay it, the more prices go up. So the more out of budget we're going to be for delivering these projects. Is there possibly a learning opportunity on not overloading our workforce?
Mr. General Manager, please.
Through Mr. Mayor, I don't think this is a reflection of overloading the workforce. I think it's more a reflection of the actual conditions that are actually occurring at the moment, and certainly the weather conditions we've had since January, since December, has certainly delayed a whole range of our construction projects. Also, there are issues around international supply chains and just getting materials and those sorts of things. So I think in terms of the learnings, it is an ongoing thing for us in managing that. One of the challenges that we face and we faced each year over the last few years, and we spent a lot of time discussing, is our capacity to deliver. In your draft budget, you've got around $91 million in capital in the draft budget. Our ability to deliver that is always a challenge, but we actually want to see ourselves, ensure that we are delivering as much as we possibly can, and our workforce are being driven to be efficient as possible, while also not driving them to the point of break. On the workforce side of it, I can say at the moment there is a high level of some level of frustration because of the weather. Our road crews and things like that, the work that they just can't get on and get the work done. And even our patching and things like that, it's very, very difficult for them. And I guess encourage the public to be mindful of that. We've got local residents here doing the best they can under quite exceptional circumstances at the moment. They can't do more than they're doing. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. General Manager. Councillor Patterson, please.
Thank you. I'd just like to make a couple of comments and a question. To me, I'd like to reflect on council and to the great work of council staff in achieving the amount of government grants over the last few years that have been delivered to the Shire, and then council's workload to deliver those grants to the ground. Adapting to the weather, as the General Manager just spoke about, then also adapting to the inflation and price increases of building products, myself being in the building trade. These price increases have seen many businesses actually fold. So for a council to be able to run and keep the delivery plan going, I see that as being a fantastic job. Also, to manage those price increases, I just like to ask a question through to Director Mitchell. the general manager touched on this at the meeting at Crescent Head the other night about the percentage of our rate base versus our budget. So, and that puts it into a bit of context why the possibility of rate rises above the rate pegging would be required after we've just had explanation of the general manager about all those increases in the products, building products.
Thank you, Director Mitchell.
Do you understand?
Sorry, Councillor Patterson, I just get you to clarify what exactly, because I wasn't at the Crescent Head community catch-up, so just to get the context of what your question is in relation to that.
Our total, I forgot again to look it up, our total rate intake. What's our total income from rates? The dollars.
It's around 23 to 25 million.
Yeah, so it's around that, and as I said, our capital works program next year is 91 million, and our total budget small. Yeah.
So sorry, just to clarify, my answer was in relation to the general fund there. That capital expenditure for next year is across all three funds, and whilst there's a significant capital expenditure program for general fund, as you're all aware, we've got significant and huge water and sewer projects as well. So so we've got to mix up the funds. That's all.
Yeah. No, I just wanted to basically make the point that the rates that council charges really don't cover these costs that council endures, and that without government grants, we would be in a lot more trouble.
Can I just add to that?
Mr. General Manager again.
Yeah, the report that council adopted last month, in relation to the next year's delivery program and operational plan that highlighted the potential need for significant rate rises. That is also before these cost increases. So this just makes it even worse. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. General Manager. Thank you for those questions, Councillor Patterson. Anyone else have a question? Councillor Bain. Comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just noting that the consolidated fund has a surplus of 1.3 million, but the general fund deficit is 1.1 million. If I could ask Director Mitchell to give us the, what's the difference between the general fund and the consolidated fund. But before you do that, please, I'd like to just make a couple of comments, because I get a lot of feedback from residents about the state of the roads, and to support what the General Manager said, that we are under the pump, that there's been this unprecedented rain events ongoing, followed by, preceded by a pandemic, preceded by the bushfires, that it's been a very, very difficult time. And the challenge is that we need to prepare for the future unprecedented events, because it seems like we just get one more unprecedented event after another. And on the positive side, I'd encourage the public to talk to the candidates in the federal election about the Australian Local Government Association proposal. And I note that that there was some movement, some commitment from both of the major parties towards increasing the financial assistance grants to local government. And I think it's important that we focus that those financial assistance grants are not tied to specific projects, but are there so that councils can address what they perceive as the local community priorities. So could you please explain for the public the difference between the consolidated fund and the general fund, please?
Thank you. Director Mitchell, please.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Bain. So the consolidated result that we report and that we talk about combines our three main funds. So it includes the general fund, water fund and sewer fund. And so the results of all three of those funds are added together, if you like, in simple terms. And that's the result that we report when we're talking about the consolidated result. So what we're projecting in terms of our net operating result before capital items for the consolidated fund, based on assuming council adopts the variations that are included within this quarterly budget review, is a consolidated net operating surplus of $1.3 million. The general fund result that we talk about is just relating to the general fund alone. It excludes the water and sewer funds, and we have to account for each of those funds separately. And so any revenue that's raised in relation to water fund can only be spent in relation on the water business, and similarly for the sewer fund. So there's a lot of focus around the general fund. That's where the majority of all of the non-water and sewer services are provided are reflected, and from a financial perspective are accounted for. So everything else in relation to, roads, all of our community services that we provide, waste, etc., is all reported through the general fund. And that's the one that I guess for us, when we're talking from a financial sustainability perspective, is the one we've got the greatest challenge. We have greater flexibility around setting prices for water and sewer fund. We're obviously cognizant of community ability to pay, and so there's certain processes that we'll go through in terms of setting prices for water and sewer fund that will enable us to deliver the future capital programs and maintain those services. General fund, we've got the rate peg, and that's what we talked about in the council meeting last week, and that causes us a lot more challenges from a financial perspective, because we on our general rates are only able to raise those by the percentage that is set via the IPART process. And so when we're looking at the general fund result for this year, so whereas the consolidated was a $1.3 million surplus, what we're proposing for the general fund is around about a $1.1 million deficit after we exclude those capital grants. And so we're still in a deficit position, despite some of the positive variations that we're showing from a financial perspective in this quarterly budget review.
Thank you, Director Mitchell.
Thank you.
Councillor Bain.
Yeah, just another point, that often the people that are most vocal about the condition of the roads are also vocal about the rate rises, and the state taking control of Macleay Valley Way and the Armidale Road would greatly change our position. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's not relevant to this report, Councillor Bain, but your points are well made. Anyone else wish to speak on the motion before us? Councillor White, you have a closing right, so no one else wishes to speak. I'll put to Councillor White if she'd like to close debate, please.
Thank you. And thank you to Councillor Bain for raising those really important points to help the public to clarify the situation. And I think the bottom line for me, is where the federal election issue you mentioned is around about the cost of living. A council as a business is not immune to that. So I think it is all about a cost of living, and for council also to manage expectations and getting these messages out into the community. So we just cannot do everything that they expect or asked us to do. So I think there's two issues there. Is one about council's not immune from the cost of living, as are the rest of us as a business, and it's important that we get those messages out to the community so they understand and we can manage their expectations or disappointment.
Thank you, Councillor White. I now put the motion. Any dissent for not supporting this? If not, I declare it carried unanimously. We now move on to 9.2, Community Grant Program, Round 2. It's on page 22 of the agenda. The recommendation is there before you. I ask for a mover and a seconder, please. A mover, please. Councillor Bain. Seconder, please. Councillor Patterson. Councillor Bain, you've moved it. Would you like to speak to your motion, please?
I'd like to support this resolution. And I'd like to congratulate council for the council staff for the great work they've done in making this a very clear and transparent process, with criteria that communities can understand, support for grant writing, and it's very clear looking through the table of the the grants evaluations, that the groups that have understood and got their heads around how to put in a good application with support of council. Prior to being a councillor, I was involved in this and felt really well supported and had questions answered. And it's also very clear the ones that don't understand the process, and they could well be targeted for a bit of education in future. But it's a very, very good process, and I congratulate council and urge my fellow councillors to support this resolution.
Thank you, Councillor Bain. Do we have any other speakers, or do we have any tough questions? You asked really tough questions. We're Manager Harper online. Answer those really tough ones. Councillor Patterson, please.
Thank you. I'd just like to support Councillor Bain's comments, but also to make note of all those people that have applied for this government grants, the council grant scheme, mayoral fund, that have not been successful, that they reapply, that they learn from council's requirements to apply for this, and that they ask for council support and what else they need to do to be possibly achievable for this grant funding. I recognise that really all those that have applied are a great community assets. So if I'd just reiterate again that they just keep applying, and thank you for whatever they do in their community support. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Do we have any other speakers or questions? If not, I'll put the motion that's before you. Is there any dissent? I declare it carried unanimously. We now move on to 9.3 on page 25. It's a reconciliation action plan. It's before you. There's a recommendation. Would anyone like to move the motion? Councillor Wyatt. Seconder. Councillor Freeman. Councillor Wyatt, would you like to speak to your motion, please?
I have a comment and then followed by a question. So just note that in this plan, there are four stages reflect in reconciliation action plans, reflect, innovate, stretch and elevate. And I think this is a really good initiative from Kempsey Council. We can't go straight into step 4. I think the brochure attached to the minutes here is a fantastic explanation, and I really hope that they that is put out there far and wide so people can really understand what is involved in a reconciliation action plan, especially in those 4 stages. I think this first step, which is 12 months is my understanding, this creates a vision of what reconciliation looks like in our community and how we're going to get there. The first step is totally about reflection and about values, personal values and corporate values, and increasing understanding, learning and understanding bias. I think that plans should be adaptive and fluid, and that each of these steps, we move from a reflective plan to the innovative, to stretch and to the elevate. Then we take lessons and evaluate each of those steps to create the next one. And I acknowledge that this RAP has been prepared in guidance from the Reconciliation Action Council and it meets their requirements. I love the artwork from, is it Stephen McLeod, if that's how he pronounces his name? Apologies if it's not. I read the story of the artwork. I love it. It's brilliant. And I really love the story in there, the forward in there from Uncle Bob. And I think that we all need to hear these stories. It's about truth telling, and I think we will all be enriched for it. And my question is, with the delays in the reporting in the delivery and operation plan, is it likely that the completion of this plan may extend beyond June 2023? There's a lot in there to deliver in 12 months. And if we discussed previously about the delays in delivery of certain things. Will this be stretched out beyond June 2023?
Thank you. Mr. General Manager.
Through Mr. Mayor, certainly we've got a very strong commitment to roll this out within the timeframes contained in the in the plan itself. It's certainly quite different than rolling out capital works where we're impacted by weather and those sorts of things. So this is internal, and we should be able to do that. It's certainly something we'd see that within the 12 to 18 months we'd be doing that. As I mentioned last night as well, there is a range of things we're also doing over and above this already in relation to our work with the local Indigenous community. So we certainly have a very strong commitment to making sure this really is embedded inside the organisation as part of our culture.
Thank you. Councillor White, did you wish to
just one more thing. I know in my own journey, I've had the pleasure, the privilege, the honour of working on country for my professional career, and I've had a lot of cultural heritage experiences and training, and my life is certainly enriched for it. And I acknowledge that there's sections in the community that would want this to go further. But have a read of those brochures, because it's just the first step in 4 plans. We have to start at the beginning, and this is a great way to start at the beginning. And I think the end journey, we will all be better enriched for it.
Thank you. Councillor Bain, you wish to speak?
Yeah, I would like to propose an amendment that for point 2, to really clarify that this is an initial step. So the amendment would read that we adopt the 12-month reflect reconciliation action plan, just so that it's really clear that this is a beginning step. If we leave it as just the reconciliation action plan, it may be perceived as a tick and flick. So that I just want to promote that this is a very important first step.
Thank you. And normal practice here is we ask the mover if they wish to accept that into their motion. If not, we then have an amendment. So, mover, Councillor White, would you accept that into the motion? Or would you like Councillor Bain to read that again?
Yes, I do agree with that. I was just actually reading this brochure. It actually talks about reconciliation action plan framework. So yes, I
so
do.
you accept it.
Yes,
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak? Councillor Freeman, please.
Oh yeah. Something that I think is really cool about this is I was just looking at the list of people in the working group for this, and there is basically all the management and coordinators. And I think this is a fantastic approach by the council to embrace this at a leadership level and allow it to flow down through the values and things that are promoted in the work areas. And I think that's going to be very effective in implementing this. I was also having a look at the different groups that were engaged in making this document, and I just really encourage council to continue the communication as this document goes through new iterations after the first 12 months. And I just encourage you to keep those communication channels open, and I look forward to the results of those communications getting stronger and stronger in further reports and versions of this document. In support.
Thank you, Councillor Freeman. Anyone else who wish to speak? If not, I would like to say I support fully the motion before us. It is a step ahead of many other councils across New South Wales and possibly across Australia. In fact, council has been contacted about this plan and how we're implementing it, and we're almost like a lighthouse organisation in that people are seeing what we're doing and saying, well, we should do this too. For those people who are watching online, the agenda for this meeting is available online, and the attachments are worth looking at. It's actually the Reconciliation Action Plan is item 1 on the attachments, and what was raised before, what is a Reconciliation Action Plan, is also attached, and the number 3rd one is the RAP commitment to community. And the important part of this, even though this is an internal operating document, this document will show the community of Kempsey Shire what can be done to make sure we have proactive and important reconciliation going on within our community. It's not just Aboriginal people, but we need the non-Aboriginal people to understand we have a history going back many thousands of years and a culture that's ongoing in our community, and we have a large part of our community that are Aboriginal people, and they should not be ignored. And this Reconciliation Action Plan is showing how we connect with that community and how council will connect with that community. So I support the motion before you. Does anyone else wish to speak again? Oh yes, Councillor Patterson.
Thank you. I just got a question, and it's just based on the outcomes of this document. We generally have, over the years, when we're adopting things, we like to measure the outcome. Is this just through to the general manager? Is there anything there that we can adopt, or that we can register as the outcomes as showing that the reconciliation plan is working? So it might be with employment, it might be housing, it might be community satisfaction. Is there any measurements that we can put out there to achieve, rather than just have an action plan that doesn't have any measurements at the end, or not at the end but are progressing?
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Mr. General Manager, please.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, the action plan itself, actually on each of the actions, has a series of measures actually on the table itself. So they're the ones that relate very specifically to the actions that council will be taking in implementing this. One would hope over time this would then have assistant with broader improvements in relationships and the situation with the Aboriginal community in the town as well. That broader measurement, though, is very difficult because there are so many different things that would influence that, not just this action plan, but each one of these actions does have a measure that we will be actually reporting on.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further questions or debate? If not, I will put the motion after I ask the mover if she wishes to reply. Councillor Wyatt.
The only comment is, additional comment rather, is for councillors, that there is a commitment in there for councillors to undergo cultural awareness training. As I mentioned, worked across New South Wales on many Aboriginal lands, spent a lot of time learning, but I've done some training here with the Dunghutti people. For me, it was just life changing and thought changing, and I really hope that I am here when we undergo councillor cultural awareness training. And I think, I just look forward to that and recommend this.
Thank you, Councillor Wyatt. I now put the motion. Is there any dissent on the motion before us? I declare it carried unanimously. Thank you. We now move on to item 9.4, and it's the Disability Inclusion Action Plan 2022-2025, 3-year plan, page 29 of the agenda. We need a mover and a seconder. Councillor Patterson, would you like to move it?
Yes, please.
A seconder. Councillor Bain. Councillor Patterson, please, would you like to speak to the recommendation or the motion that is now before us?
Yes, thank you. I'd like to commend council for putting this together and having an effort to try and encapsulate that section of our community that do struggle with disabilities, and trying to move forward with plans to hopefully make it more inclusive for people that have disabilities to live in our community and to live as normal a life as that they can. And noting that myself, I have a disabled brother, and hoping that plans like this will definitely benefit him and other people that in our community that live with disabilities and families as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Councillor Bain, please.
Yes, I'd like to speak strongly in support of this resolution. Firstly, I've spoken to members of the Disability Inclusion Group who have worked through the plan and been consulted, and they feel that this is reflective of what they want, and it was very positive. It's one of the great things about community engagement. I think this is really, really powerful. Looking through the plan, I really like the stories from individuals with disability that they have the opportunity to say their piece. In fact, I know quite a few of them because I worked in disability services as an educator for a long time. And the last point I would like to make is that disability inclusion is so important for community because access for one is access for all. So, for example, if we put in ramps for people in wheelchairs, those ramps also help elderly people on a walking frame or young mums with kids in a pushchair. It just helps everyone. Disability inclusion is one really, really important signs of let's say, a civilised society. So I congratulate Council on this, the Council staff on the development of this plan, and commend it to my colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bain. Anyone else wish to speak on the Disability Inclusion Action Plan? If not, we will now move to a motion on it after I ask Councillor Patterson if he'd like to speak to close debate.
No, just once again, look forward to the fellow councillors supporting this motion, and that we can show those people in our community with disabilities, be it physical or mental, financial, any sort of disability, that they can be happy and look for a future to live in our community.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Is there any dissent on the motion before you? Declare it carried. Thank you, councillors. We move on now to 9.5, rental assessment and rebate. It's a recommendation on page 33 of the agenda. Seek a mover and a seconder. Councillor Freeman, please. Mover, and a seconder, please. Councillor Bain. Councillor Freeman.
Yeah, awesome. I just had a question through the mayor. Did we find out how many of our council sites that are being rented out to non-for-profit organisations? Did we find out what the number was?
Do we have an answer, Councillor Mitchell? Director Mitchell, sorry to promote you.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I think just in terms of round numbers, we need to do a little bit more work just to sort of confirm these. But we've got sort of between 100 and 110 leases and licences. The vast majority of those are in relation to grazing. So close to 50% would be sort of largely grazing related. Some of the others around our airport and also communication towers. So not a huge amount of them are buildings as such. There could be, of the remaining ones, there could be around about sort of 20%, which may be sort of not-for-profit organisations. The vast majority of those, though, will be not impacted because they would meet those, if you refer to the schedule that's at the back of the procedure, they would meet those criteria where they would be in that sort of category 1. So whereas at the moment they would be largely not paying any rent. They would continue to be in that sort of category, or paying only the minimum statutory rent, which is only around about $500 a year. So a very minimal impact in relation to those.
Thank you, Director Mitchell. Councillor Freeman, do you wish to speak any further on the motion you've put?
No, I'm all good, thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak? Councillor Patterson, please.
Just ask for through to the general manager, just a short assessment of why we're going through with this in relation to achieving the best outcome for the ratepayers of the Midway.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Mr. General Manager, please.
Yeah, I might just get Mr. Mitchell to outline that, because I think Councillor Patterson fairly well summarised it himself.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Patterson, I guess what we've tried to do in the report is to sort of summarise the key reasons for proposing these changes. Obviously, we want to align with Crown Lands and the policies and their position around these, given that they will also have some leases, for example, across our local government area. So we want to make sure that that we're not misaligned with them, and particularly we want to ensure that we've got a consistent, transparent and accountable structure in place, that it's very clear that there's no sort of ambiguity for any of our potential lessees or licensees. And so, first and foremost is to make sure that we've got those sort of frameworks and structures in place so that we meet those objectives. And I guess in addition to that is also then taking into consideration some of the financial sustainability issues that we know that we've got, and where some organisations should be more appropriately paying rents of a more commercial nature, that we're putting those arrangements in place where they've got the financial capacity to do that. So the criteria that's within the procedure and as has been articulated within the report is very much to support those organisations in the community, the smaller community-based organisations. But where you've got other organisations that are renting properties from council that have got large turnovers and have got the capacity to pay, then from a broader rate payer perspective, it's reasonable for them to be paying a more commercial-based rental. Part of that, and these changes, and as is included in the report, that there would be a transitional sort of arrangement so that it wouldn't be a big bang straight away. It would be phased in over a 5-year period. We understand that other businesses have got budgetary considerations like ours, and so it would be phased in should council resolve to adopt the procedure that's in front of you today.
Thank you.
That explanation was a lot better than it reads. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bain.
I'd like to note that I can see in reading the report there are like three basic areas of those community services that are that don't have high turnover of money, but they provide services to the community that meet the goals of our vision for our community, but also they can actually save our community money by diverting people from antisocial behaviour, if you like. I note the submission by farmers that's saying small lease areas. It's actually a win-win for council to be working with them because we don't have to maintain those areas because they will look after them. But also that point that organisations with a high income or high turnover, possibly not high income, even not for profits that are having a high turnover, could actually be supporting the rest of the Shire and taking some of that rate relief from our ratepayers. So I think this is a very clear and transparent process, and once again congratulate council staff on working such a transparent process that is clear. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bain. Do we have any other speakers? Councillor Freeman, do you wish to close debate?
I would, thank you. Thanks heaps for the explanations that you guys have given. I think that's really great, and I really appreciate the care and thought that you guys have put into these different categories in making sure that we're actually achieving our goals for the community, being proper return for our ratepayers, and also good services that are often given by non-for-profits. So I encourage the rest of my fellow councillors to support this.
Thank you, Councillor Freeman. I'll put the motion before you. Is there any dissent? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Move on to 9.6, Oven Mountain Pumped Hydro Energy Storage Project, and Councillor Bain is leaving the meeting for this item. Thank you, Councillor Bain. Recommendation is on page 41. Would someone like to move that? Councillor Patterson, thank you. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Freeman. Councillor Patterson, do you wish to speak to it, please?
Thank you. I've just got a couple of questions that go with it as well, just to put this on record. One of the questions through to the General Manager is, well, probably two questions, you'll probably answer them all at the same time. The actual development, is it in our actual shire? And do we have a say on whether that this is constructed or not at our council level?
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Mr. General Manager, please.
Through Mr. Mayor, it's actually in the Armidale Shire Council area, so it's not in ours. However, a lot of the work to undertake the construction, should this go ahead, the traffic would come through our shire to actually access the site. So it does impact us in this way. Council, however, has no direct role in making any decisions actually about the project. It's not one of the regulatory bodies, it's not one of the approval bodies in this.
And I'd just like to make a comment as well that I personally see that why we should pay the price with the environment, for the construction and ongoing work of this Oven Mountain Hydro scheme. Why should we pay the price with our environment to play catch up on an unachievable race to make ourselves feel better about an unachievable climate change? By damaging the environment? It just makes no sense to me. Thank you.
Is that a question you wish to ask, Councillor Patterson? Comment. That was your speaking to the motion. Thank you. Before I ask Councillor White to ask or speak, I'd like to ask the General Manager, could he outline the significance of a critical state significant infrastructure project, and is this is one of them? Are there many more in the state, and who manages that?
Through Mr. Mayor, the state government, as a key, obviously, legislator and approval body, designates certain projects as state significant. Once they've done that, it follows their processes, and they're actually the approval authority. I couldn't tell you the list of how many of those are currently on the books, but there's numerous state significant allocated projects across a whole range of different infrastructure areas happening at the same time in New South Wales.
Thank you, Mr. General Manager. Councillor White, please.
Yeah, thank you. It's got a few comments. First, I do note that it's like a startup project or a concept planning has received some money from the federal government. I'm not sure how many millions, but I think it's a few millions. It's also a critical infrastructure project, as you just mentioned, from the state government, and it's also in Armidale LGA. So I'm not sure. I think there's probably a little bit of bias there in undertaking some environmental assessments. I think in the role of advocacy that Kempsey Council need to advocate for the best outcome for environmental protection, owners of the land, users of the surrounding areas, and the employment promises that this project makes. And I note yesterday that in the public forum talked about the reasons for opposing the Other Mountain project. I mean, my personal values is I'm not completely on board with this project. I feel that to create sustainable green energy by ruining an environmental value doesn't sit comfortably with me. I feel it's a tad hypocritical, but I'm not fully aware of the project. I haven't read any of there's no environmental assessment, so I have not read that. I think in advocating for the community, Kempsey Council would need to advocate community opinion somehow and not just rely on, staff assessments, but somehow try and gauge that community opinion if council's taking on that advocacy role. And I note that in representations to the Other Mountain project team that the Aboriginal community did vote unanimously to oppose the project. In the response, I'd like to see more value placed on non-threatened environmental values and matters of non-environmental significance, which is the federal government legislation part. Environmental assessment usually focuses on threatened species and not common species that may be at the limits of their home range, or that they're at their distribution extent. So, north, south, east, or west is their limit of extent, or that this infrastructure creates a disconnect in the ecological function. So the home ranges may be disjointed, or the localised genetic integrity may be disjointed. And in this situation, we've got high values on aesthetic integrity and reduction in the naturalness of this area. Like, this is sitting in between. You've got, I think it's Carrow Plateau, you've got World Heritage, Wilderness, State Forest, National Park, and it's sitting right in the middle there. The comment is around an archaeological and anthropological approach is an academic construct, and Aboriginal people are storytellers, and it's a narrative culture. And the culture is not always found in primitive tools that an archaeologist seek to find and justify the presence or absence of Aboriginal heritage. I have professional concern over their choice of the persons to undertake that environmental heritage assessment. I know we have no responsibility on that. I also don't think that we should be starstruck by the employment opportunity, and we should be asking what are they doing right now to ensure that Kempsey and Armidale people are skilled up to take on these jobs, 3,000 jobs. We can't just walk into those. There are skills required. So what are they doing right now to make sure that these 3,000 jobs that they're proposing to have will be there? So let's not have the wool pulled over our eyes or be starstruck by that. And recently, my neighbour, someone down my street actually was camping up there, and she came across some people that were doing some work there, and their job was to ferry the people doing the assessment across the river. And you would think if they're employing local people, you would think that would be someone from Bellbrook, I'm sure, just to drive a boat across. They came from Scone, so that's not a local job. Like, why would you need someone to ferry people across the river in a boat from Scone? So, yeah, they're my comments.
Thank you, Councillor White. You are not foreshadowing an amendment on community consultation or training up locals?
Yeah, okay, yes, I hadn't thought about that. Yes, so if I could add an amendment there, is that we advocate in our advocacy role, is that we ask Other Mountain project is what are they doing right now for ensuring that local jobs are going to be provided. So have they started that process? So if someone can put that in a motion for me, that would be good, please.
Probably you could add that to 3E, economic activity include, because you've already got continues to advocate there. So it continues to advocate or advise with respect to economic activity, including local employment.
And training, and so that training has to start now and not when the project is all approved.
Yeah.
So they need to be, I guess the word is employment ready.
Yeah.
So that local people need to be employable ready, not when they start the project, but they need to be able to take on those jobs now. So add employment ready. Yeah. And I guess the other motion would be
amendment.
Sorry. A motion.
So you can put them up, and then I'll ask them to move if they wish to accept them in. So
okay.
But you make that wording economic activity, including employment local employment and training. It does relate to F as well, but you could consider it either, but yeah, just keep it in E at the moment.
Can you say add employment readiness? I mean, it's a term I understand, but does that make sense as a term? And so they're ready to be employed, so they start their training now.
Is that it? Thank you.
Yeah, my other one is around the community consultation bit. Is add something in there. The advocacy role is that somehow we gauge community opinion as well. If council's advocating for the community, have to gauge community opinion somehow.
Would that be further on, Councillor Wyatt, after the EIS comes out? Because we really need that information before we consult, wouldn't we? We're just putting it to you. It can be an amendment. It's up to you.
Are we not being asked to support a recommendation that Kempsey Council advocates for our community in this project? So therefore, isn't it therefore important that we understand what the community want? Happy to have discussion.
Well, yes, we could move into committee of the whole to have that discussion, but we need a motion for that to happen. Councillor, Mr. General Manager, you might have some advice, please.
I think council would need to, but I acknowledge that there's a need to understand a certain level of what the community is wanting here, to actually be able to go to a level of engaging, for us to engage and gauge the community. You are talking about a fairly extensive and costly exercise. So you can't legally actually do that off the floor, because you actually have to show a budget and where that budget's actually coming from. So we can't actually do that. It is the proponent's responsibility to actually do that community engagement. And they are actually doing it. So we need to be careful also that we don't take on their responsibilities in that regard. I think the areas highlighted there in A to H give a good idea to the community of the areas we'll be advocating on their behalf. And certainly, feedback from the community would be welcome in any of those sorts of areas. I think the extensive networks council already has across, those things would help formulate those opinions and those submissions between what the councillors' own networks and the networks within the staff as well would give you a pretty good understanding of that.
Thank you, Councillor White.
Yeah,
I understand that.
Yeah.
And further down the track, when we can have a notice of motion or even ask for a report to come back to council on further consultation. But first of all, we've got to go through this process.
Yeah, that's fine. Can I have a response?
Yes, Councillor Wyatt, please.
Thank you. Yeah, I understand. I fully appreciate and understand that there is extra work. Perhaps the advocacy part then is just to make sure that Alvin Mountain project is having a very diverse, inclusive, expansive consultation process, and not just relying on hoping that people pick up an internet link to read. It'll be thousands of pages of an EIS document. So the advocacy is that it's their consultation is diverse, inclusive, expansive.
Thank you. I'll ask the mover, Councillor Patterson, would you like to accept that amendment to 3E, please? So it's all the words after economic activity.
On screen, yeah.
So everything after economic activity, Councillor Patterson, including local employment readiness and training.
That's fine. I'd accept that into it.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Is there any further debate?
Just one
Councillor, Mr. General Manager, please.
Just going back to Councillor Wyatt's point about the consultation, one of the things we will do is when we know the proponents are putting things out for the community engagement, we will promote that as well, so that they're actually aware of it and get that out through our network.
Thank you, Mr. General Manager. And you'd like to close debate?
Question and close debate.
Yeah, thank you.
A question, where in this would it pick up the lifetime of the actual project? I guess anything that's built has a operating lifetime. Is there would there be a negative impact on the Shire when it gets to a point where it's over and done with and closed down, or to get to a point where it's 25 years down the track where the whole thing would be rebuilt, or is there any anywhere in there that can be picked up? Because I see it as we're talking about our environment here, and I see it being not a long-term project. Based on the fact that we're going to need baseload power for a long term, and that this is not an actual generator of any positive power. It actually costs more power to pump the water up the hill than the power it makes coming down the hill.
Mr. General Manager, could you answer that question, please?
Yeah. Through Mr. Mayor, the lifespan would be in excess of 50 years, we believe. I think the EIS would probably be outlining that sort of lifespan, and most of these projects now within their proposals and within their approvals actually have rehabilitation requirements on them as well. So I think they're things for us to look for when that EIS comes out, and if they're not included, for us to actually make submissions around that.
Councillor Patterson, do you wish to close debate now?
Yep. Just by closing the debate, I'll just make a couple of comments on this about the ownership being a Chinese family, I believe, and there's been some comments made in council about the percentages of other countries that have investments in our country, and which America, England, Netherlands, etc., which none of those are really, I would concede that none of those are really a issue with Australia at the moment, where I see the possibility of China being not an advocate. That's just a personal comment. And the other thing is, it's just a shame that we have a project that will now be going, say, 50 years, like the gentleman just said, that is just putting the cart before the horse, I believe, in the fact that we're just trying to switch over out of fossil fuel too quickly at the cost of our environment and at the cost of jobs for this country. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. I'll put the motion. Is there any dissent on the motion before you as amended? If not, I declare it carried. And we'll ask Councillor Bain to come back in. So that was exceptional.
Yeah, they got pulled out the pre-show. Yep, got 97.
Yep. So we're moving on to item 9.7. It's on page 47. We're waiting on Councillor Bain to return to the chamber. Hopefully he'll make a dramatic entrance soon. Well, we could. We'll go to morning tea now, and then come back for 9.7 voluntary planning agreement after morning tea. We will meet again at 10, or adjourn the meeting until 10 to 11, please. Welcome back from morning tea. We're next item on the agenda, which I foreshadowed before we went to morning tea, is 9.7 on page 47. It's the voluntary planning agreement with Maxus Gardens of 356 Gregory Street, Southwest Rocks. The recommendation is before you. Do we have a mover, please? If there's no mover, it lapses. Councillor Patterson moves it. Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Have a seconder, please. Councillor Bain. Councillor Patterson, would you like to speak to the motion, please?
No, thank you. I'll hold my option.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. He reserves his right to speak in reply to any other comments. The motion is there before you, and it's all about the proposed planning agreement.
I will.
Do we have a speaker? Yes, we do. Councillor Wyatt.
Yes, thank you. I just note that yesterday we were given just a little bit of an explanation from Manager Graham Snow, who explains that this process predates the biobanking and the bio-offset scheme of today, which the current scheme requires developers to offset their environmental impact. And I note that this is an issue for the people of Kempsey and people of Southwest Rocks, as well as where development is occurring, is that there is at least some localised biodiversity offsets. Now, given this motion here predates that scheme, I guess this is the next best thing. And I note that this VPA is about another ghost development occurring in Southwest Rocks, and we're not here to discuss this. But as soon as those trees start to be cleared, there will be a lot of angst and a lot of sadness in the community when they start seeing some more development going on. And I do feel slightly better, if that's slightly comforted, that a developer is contributing a small amount of money to environmental projects locally. I think that is a really good outcome, particularly at Boyders Lane and MPWS. I know the money that they contribute is probably small in comparison to what they make, but it's a start. And I just asked a question that there is a management plan for Boyders Lane, I presume.
Question from the Councillor, Director Fish, please.
Yes, that would be correct, and there's obviously ongoing maintenance with respect to that site.
Thank you, Director Fish. Councillor Wyatt.
Yes, thank you. So I support the VPA, Voluntary Planning Agreement, and just note that once the trees start getting cleared, there will be some more angst and sadness amongst the community, and that is good. Given, aside from the planning issues or around ghost developments, this is good that the money will go to a local environmental project.
Thank you, Councillor Wyatt. Are there any other speakers? Councillor Bain, please.
I'd like to support what Councillor Wyatt said, that it's really good that voluntary contribution will be added to in the local area, whereas we know that there are some problems with that biodiversity offset scheme with money that's being paid locally, not being spent locally. I think it would be really, really beneficial if, when we plan what's going to happen with that money, that it can be promoted strongly in the community, so that when the angst happens, when the trees start to come down and the development commences, then we can talk to the community and say, look, this money is being spent to maintain areas of ecological significance. This is what we're doing. This is how we balance development and environmental protection. So we get that very clear message to the community, because there is going to be pain.
Thank you, Councillor Bain. Any further speakers?
I just have a question.
You'd like to ask a question. You can't speak again.
Yeah, no.
Yes, thank you.
And it's a question. Is what Councillor Bain said worth putting in a motion here? An amendment?
Well, it's up to councillors if there's an amendment, but you can seek advice from council staff.
Advice.
You need advice. Thank you, Director Fish, please.
Yeah, through the Mayor. The intent of the report is to put the voluntary planning agreement on exhibition, and the agreement itself is about providing those funds to undertake maintenance and further, I guess, improvement works within the Boyters Lane wetlands. So I don't think that needs to be written out prescriptively in the recommendation. I think it's better keeping it to the, I guess, the process that's required here, which is for the BPA to go on exhibition.
Thank you, Director Fish. Councillor White, you're happy with that? You don't need to move an amendment?
I don't think so, no.
Okay, thank you, Councillor White. Are there any further speakers who wish to speak on this motion before us? If not, I'll ask Councillor Patterson if he wishes to close debate, please.
Yes, thank you. Just making note that that these planning issues were of a very old nature. That it's not wasn't under council's current standards with development. But something that we can't forget is that this is a development that's going to contain houses which people are going to live in that come to the Macleay to seek a future, bring children, to be look for a future of living in this beautiful area, and to have this voluntary planning agreement. I know it's just playing a little bit of catch up, but on the whole, I think it's a good outcome, and a fantastic outcome also for those people who will be living in our Macleay in these houses. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. I'll now put the motion. Is there any dissent for the motion before us? There isn't, so I declare it carried unanimously. And I would now like someone from council or councillor to move that we go into confidential, please. Councillor Bain moves we go into confidential. Seconded, Councillor Freeman. Is there any dissent on that procedural motion? I declare it carried. We now move into confidential, and I ask the public gallery to be cleared.
Thank you. In relation to the matters considered in closed session and the one that was adopted earlier as part of the consensus motion, in relation to item 11.1 legal matters, Council resolved the Council receive and note the report. In relation to item 11.2 TQE 22/1 rehabilitation of apron and taxiways at Kempsey Airport, Council resolved the Council 1 note the withdrawal of Antoon Civil Engineering Australia Proprietary Limited as the previously resolved successful tenderer for TQE 22/1 rehabilitation of apron and taxiways at Kempsey Airport. 2, authorise the General Manager or their delegate to A, enter into negotiations and, if successful, enter into a contract with Civil Infrastructure Proprietary Limited as the second ranking tender respondent to deliver the project to rehabilitate the apron and taxiways at Kempsey Airport within the approved total project budget, and B, if negotiations are unsuccessful, approve the release of a retender to market. And 3, note that a formal extension of time to deliver the project under the Regional Airports Program is currently being sought.
Thank you, Manager Thorogood. There is no more business before us. I declare the May Council meeting closed.
Councillors, just before you go,